Well, we're going to get started now. Thank you all for being here. First of all, obviously, I'm not David Plank, the Executive Director of PACE. David actually is out of the country on some research. And my name's Jerry Shelton. I'm with Capital Advisors Group, and we provide support for PACE in running the seminars and the other work that PACE does up here in Sacramento. So we're pleased to have another seminar today. This is the last scheduled PACE seminar of the year. Now notice I emphasize the word scheduled. There may be other PACE seminars that we provide announcements to you for, depending on what topics come up during the summer and things. So look for emails from us if there are other issues that will be addressed by PACE up here in Sacramento. So today we're pleased to have Daniel Solorzano from UCLA and Amanda Datnow from University of California, San Diego. And they'll be talking to us about educational access and educational opportunities, particularly for low income and students in poverty. And with that, I'll leave it to you, folks.
Thank you. Welcome. I'm excited to see so many of you here on Friday afternoon to listen to us. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of our presentation. And first, what I'm going to do is talk generally about the project that we've been engaged in for the past 5 years. And then I'm going to turn it over to Danny to explain our findings on a particular subportion of the project that concerns developmental education in community colleges for low-income students. And then we're going to open up for questions because we're really eager to hear what you're interested in. So this might be different than some other presentations you have seen here, I'm not sure. But we're presenting on a large project and one piece of that project. So with the country's economic downturn and its need for greater post-secondary participation, Pathways to Post-Secondary Success, which is the name of our study, was launched in 2008 to provide scholarship and policy recommendations to help improve post-secondary success, particularly for low-income youth. And the project is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for 5 years. It's ending this summer, so we have a huge influx of reports coming out, which we'll tell you about. So part of the reason for the study was because while there are still disparities in college access, low-income students and students of color are increasing their access to higher education institutions. However, once these students get to college, they still face a host of obstacles. So we were interested in finding out what could be done in colleges to help, and even in high schools, to help facilitate these students' success in college and to minimize the barriers. And we'll tell you a bit about some of both today. So we have a very large research team. It's a very big study. We have over 50 researchers that and includes faculty like Danny and myself. We're the co-PIs for the project. We also have faculty at all of the different universities that you see here on the slide, as well as graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, research scientists, undergraduates, a whole host of people who are all doing work on the same set of questions but in different methodological ways, which I'll explain to you. So this is a study of low-income young adults and their post-secondary pathways to earn a credential in the labor market. We think we're examining questions that are relevant to policymakers, college leaders, and faculty, K-12 faculty leaders, and others who help low-income students in their post-secondary preparation. So the questions include, what are their life experiences of the students? What systemic opportunities and obstacles exist in their pathway to PSE, post-secondary ed? How might the systemic opportunities be maximized and the obstacles minimized? And then what statistical indicators could provide useful information about progress towards PSE? And before I get into the study findings, I want to give you a little bit of a sense of the framework from which we're approaching our work. Okay. For us, we think it's important to use an asset-based approach. So traditionally, as you may know, scholarship on low-income students has focused on the traits and characteristics that supposedly lead to their poor performance in college participation or in school generally. And the problem with this deficit perspective, as we see it, is that it blames the students for their situation and doesn't recognize the institutional and structural barriers that they might face. And also because this research places the emphasis at the individual level, at the level of the student, it also ignores an opportunity to think about how might we structure supports or institutional conditions so that more students can be successful. So when we do our research, we try to use an asset-based approach so that we can think about the strengths that the students bring with them to their daily interactions in colleges and high schools. And it also helps us better understand how can we design programs that better tap into students' assets and skills and so on in order to support their overall college success. The second and important part of our project is the importance of youth perspectives. While it's definitely important for us to analyze demographic patterns and institutional outcomes, which we do, such analysis, we believe, is incomplete unless we understand from the ground level why these phenomena occur. So in this sense, we take a student-centered approach to take a look at the day-to-day realities students confront as they navigate college or the pathway to college and how they interpret and navigate through these experiences. So when we describe our methods, you'll see that we have, we were looking at large databases, but we're also looking at individual students via case studies. Third, in our focus on low-income students, we recognize that this population is very diverse, includes various groups with unique needs and characteristics. In our Pathways project, particular groups we're paying attention to is single mothers who are represented in a large way in community colleges, students of color, immigrant students, including undocumented students. And so we believe that paying attention to the needs and the similarities and the differences in the needs of these groups helps us keep in mind how we might shape policies that could support them. And finally, as we'll talk more about, we believe it's important to broaden our definition of indicators of success beyond traditional outcomes. So we look at civic engagement in addition to academic engagement, for example. Okay. So our project has 5 different, we call them outcomes. The first is we began the project 5 years ago by bringing together a group of scholars from diverse fields to talk about the problem of post-secondary access and completion, and to write a set of literature reviews and empirical studies that will help us understand the population that we're studying. This resulted in a special double issue of a journal called JustBar, which I have here, which we can access on the web. And so out of that work, we kind of grew the framework for the study. The second piece of our work is a national analysis. This part of the project focuses on analysis of 2 longitudinal data sets you might be familiar with. One is the Educational Longitudinal Survey, ELS, and the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, also known as AdHealth. And these 2 data sets together provide us with a lot of information about young people's trajectories as they transition out of K-12 and into higher education and employment. And so some of the reports that you can find on our website, which we'll share with you, talk about those pathways. The third piece of our work is a California Young Adult Survey. This part of the project focuses on participation in post-secondary education and employment and civic engagement for 18 to 26-year-olds. So we launched, Veronica Tarika has led this part of the study out of USC, we launched a 2,200-person telephone survey of youth right now. And the goal of this was to figure out what's happening in the state currently with these students, particularly in the context of the current economic downturn. And I should tell you that when we launched our study, that is exactly when the downturn occurred. In fact, when we wrote the proposal, that hadn't been the case. So it was kind of fortuitous because we really had an opportunity to study how current conditions were affecting young people here in California. The fourth part of our study is case studies. And these examine how low-income youth make meaning of their educational experiences to and through post-secondary ed. And these case studies are in 3 different regions of California, as I'll explain. The final part is a set of indicators. And so we've been developing, and some of those are just about to come live, web-based tools and monitoring reports that describe the status of California young adults in different parts of the state and the conditions needed to improve post-secondary access for low-income youth. And the team that does this work for us uses descriptive statistics from publicly available data to provide information on the kinds of things that the project is interested in: access, outcomes, employment. So before we delve into some of our findings, I'm going to give you a little bit of a picture of California's youth in poverty, that we're all on the same page. Okay. So this graph that I'm going to show you, I think I'll just put it all up here at once. It'd be easier to look at, I think. Presents data from the American Community Survey, and it shows the proportion of young people ages 16 to 17 who are living in poverty. And we classified, in our study, in all of our parts of our research, we classified a person as low income if their family income for a family of 4 was 40,790 or below. And this is 185% of the federal poverty line. And we use this marker because it's also what qualifies people for Medicare, food stamps, free and reduced price lunch programs. And as you can see here, substantial numbers of young people in this age range, if you look at the all youth category, qualify as low income. And there are also substantial ethnic disparities. As you can see here, 67%, so 2/3 of Latino immigrant youth in this age range are in poverty. And almost half of African American students, or young people, and half of Latinos. So we have some rather pressing problems here in our state with young people who are in poverty. Okay, so because Danny's going to be reporting a little bit on some of our case study data, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on the methods of that piece. So as I mentioned, we decided to gain more knowledge of low-income youth experience through a set of case studies of youth in LA, San Diego, and Riverside. And as I mentioned, part of the reason for this was to really capture what's happening on the ground as students move to and through higher education. And this has been particularly illuminating because in the field in which we're working, in higher education, there is a dearth of qualitative research on students' experiences. So much of the research is quantitative, which is incredibly valuable, and we're doing that too. But we really think it's important to figure out where are the stopgaps in the system, where we design these policies, how are students actually interacting with them, taking advantage of them, or not. And I have to say this has been an extremely enlightening process because I think many of the things that we've worked hard to set up for students may not work as well at the local level once we figure out some of the circumstances. Okay, so these case studies, again, in 3 communities. Each study had almost 100 low-income students who were interviewed 2 to 3 times over a several-year period about their educational experiences. So approximately a little over 300 students that we started with. We talked to them about college decision-making, how their daily lives impact their schooling trajectories. In Los Angeles, we studied students in several pathways: basic skills, developmental ed, career and technical education, and transfer tracks. In Riverside, we were focusing specifically on low-income women and single mothers in community colleges who interface with the CalWorks program, with CARE, EOPS, some of those programs we can talk more about at another time. And in San Diego, we were actually studying students as they transitioned out of high school. So the team in San Diego looked at students who were juniors and seniors in high school and tracked them for several years to see where they went. And so some of those students ended up in community college as well and other places. And we also interviewed institutional representatives in all of the institutions. We observed them in class. We attended orientations with them. We shadowed a select group of youth. We had a very intensive set of data collection. This graph shows you the demographic breakdown of the students in our case studies. Of the 308 students in the case study portion, 57% were Latino, 18% were Black, and there were a mix of students of other races, as you can see. So I'm going to transition to Dan Solorzano, who's going to tell you a little bit more about what we've learned about students' community college experiences. And because we are limited in our time today, we're going to kind of hone in on the issue of developmental ed and some of our students' experiences in that process. But he's going to start by telling you a little bit about statewide data on enrollment, so it'll give you a bit of a better picture.
Thanks, Amanda. And thank you for inviting us, and thanks for listening to this presentation. Community colleges. And I'm going to share some data with you that will talk about, I think most of you in this room understand the importance of community colleges in California's higher education system. And hopefully by the end of these couple of slides, you'll think so even more. Community colleges are seen as, by many students that we've been interviewing as the last opportunity to get it together. Often when we interview our students, that's what they're telling us. As you know, in many ways, that's what it is, right? It's the gateway into higher education for many of our students, many low-income students, students of color. And what they tell us is it's my last chance to get it together. They tell us that it's the first meaningful experience with school engagement. Many of them don't see high school as having that meaningful engagement, especially at the post-secondary level, obviously. But basically, that's what they're telling us. They're telling us it's a means of building a new self-identity and a higher self-esteem. So they're explaining that to us over time. Amanda mentioned we're interviewing them over 3 points in time. So we've interviewed, it's almost like a quasi-longitudinal study because we're following these students over time as they make their way through post-secondary education. And then finally, they tell us it's a way to broaden their worldview, and it builds interest in the new lines of work and interest areas. So this is what they're telling us. Now, having said all that, if you had been with Amanda and I in the beginning of this project back in 2008, and we were trying to pull this project together. I'll be honest with you. If you had asked us what are the major issues, I would have thought it was transfer, issues around transfer. I didn't think CTE or career and technical education was a high priority. I realize now that it is a high priority. But there's one area that I didn't realize, and this is what I've been schooled by having contact with students, having contact with schools, with community colleges, and that's the issue around developmental education. And what you're going to hear about today is the questions around developmental education. I'm not going to focus about some of the other areas. We can maybe get to that in Q&A, but I want to focus on developmental education. Some people call it remedial education. We choose not to use that term. Some people call it basic skills education. We don't use that term. We use developmental ed, and I'll define that more specifically in a second. But let's do some context. California's community colleges, as you know, are the largest. The 112 campuses are the largest in the United States. And I'll have a slide for that. But let's look at some trend data. What do the trend data look like in terms of community college students here in California? Native American students, that line on the bottom, it's a little less than 1%. It's a relatively flat line. It hasn't grown much over this period from 1992 to 2011. It's a relatively flat trajectory. For African Americans, it's relatively flat as well. It's only went up 1% from 1992 to 2000, from 7 to 8% of all community college enrollments in the state of California. For Asian Americans, it's at 14% in 92, 93, and it went up to 15% in 2011. For whites, it went from a majority in 1992-93 at 50%, and it's now about 32%, or about a third of California community college students. For Latinos, it went from about 19%, or 1/5 in 1992-93, and today it's 34%. Look at the trend line. You can see where this is headed. Those of us who work in community colleges, I taught in community college for over 10 years at Santa Monica College and East Los Angeles College, long before I came to UCLA. And so I know a little bit about community colleges. But when you look at this trend line, you realize that these numbers for Latino students are only going up, and for white students are only going down. Right? This is a demographic reality in the state of California. And you could have predicted this, and you can continue to predict this if you look at the K through 12 public school data. Right? Latinos today are 52% of all K through 12 public school students in the state of California, with the same trend line, increasing as opposed to declining. In 2010-2011, 25% of all community college students in the United States were in California. 1/4 of all community college students in the United States are in this state, in this 112 campuses. Right? So, I mean, despite what some people say, or some people leaving California to try to address some of the community college issues nationwide, my feeling is that you can't leave California. You got to look at California. You got to deal with California. These numbers tell us that we have to deal with them. Some large foundations are not funding studies in California any longer, choosing to go to other spaces and other states to try to address these issues. I think you got to stay in the state and you got to deal with issues like we're going to be sharing in a second. This is sort of the state rank to sort of reinforce that. As you can see, California has the highest number of students in the United States relative to any other state. Texas follows closely behind. I shouldn't say closely. Follows behind. I think they have around 70 or 72 community colleges compared to California's 112. Followed by Florida, which I think is in the mid-30s, maybe the mid to high 30s in terms of the number of community colleges, followed by Illinois and New York. California is as large as the next 3 states, the states of Texas, Florida, and Illinois. That's how big this we're talking about in terms of a system. You know, I sit on Tom Bailey's Center for Community College Research Advisory Board at Teachers College. And there we're having these conversations about, you know, what are the big issues in community colleges nationwide. But we're not really looking at California. A lot of the studies are looking at other states. They're looking at New York, or they're looking at Virginia, they're looking at Maryland, they're looking at North Carolina, Michigan. They're not looking at California, and I feel that we have to look at this state. We've got to be able to deal with issues in the state of California. And so, and for that reason, because there's just demographically, we got to deal with those issues. And so, this section, I'm going to focus specifically on something called developmental education. And I'm going to use the Latino as a case example, based on some of the data, both quantitative data that we've collected and some of the qualitative data that we've collected in the last 4 years that we've been part of this project. And so, to give you an example, using some of the data that we've collected, if you started with 100 post-secondary students, Latino students in California, 100, 16 will be in the CSU. Again, a huge post-secondary system, one of the largest in the country, four-year systems in the country. Only 6, or 5 I should say, are going to be at the University of California, the system that Amanda and I are a part of, the system that the center supports, the center here in Sacramento. But 80 of those 100 students are going to be in the community college. So I often tell my graduate students, I mean, if you're talking about post-secondary education, and you want to know where the game's being played, that's where it's being played, at community colleges. Yet, next week, we're going to be back up here in San Francisco, back up in the Bay Area in San Francisco for AERA. And we're going to be going to different sessions at AERA. Some of you are going to be there, maybe, hopefully. And you're going to find very few panels, very few presidential addresses on community colleges. I mean, unfortunately, in higher education, community college research doesn't have the same status and prestige as other segments of post-secondary education, unfortunately, right? And going to a national meeting like AERA and seeing the number or the lack of scholarly presentations in this area, you may see that pattern, that unfortunate pattern, at least for me, in the work that we do. But, as you know, community colleges have multiple functions, and we have to address that. We have to acknowledge their multiple functions, right? For many, many years, I only focused on the transfer function. That's really what I focused on. More and more, I'm looking at the importance of the career and technical education function of the community college and trying to understand what's happening there. One of my colleagues, our colleagues at UCLA, Mike Rose, just published a book as part of this Gates project, looking at career and technical education, looking at a couple of campuses in Southern California, looking at this very issue. So you might want to take a look at Mike's work. But also it has this sort of lifelong learning sort of responsibility or goal as well. And many students, well, many of us in this room probably took a community college course just to better ourselves. Saturday afternoon class, or an evening class, or even a weekday class. This lifelong learning function that the community college has. But it also has this basic skills function. And this is something I really wasn't aware of 5 years ago when we started this project, 4 years ago. It wasn't on my radar screen until I started listening to our colleagues, listening to our students, just listening to people's research on what were some of the major issues in this part of the pipeline. And so, of those people who do transfer, the Latino students, those same 100, about 9 are going to go to CSU, and 2 are going to go to the UC. So even those that transfer, they're not coming into the UC in the same numbers as they're going into the CSU. For good reason, obviously. I mean, there's 23 campuses in the CSU. There's only 9 undergraduate campuses in the UC. That might be part of it. There might be other reasons that we can talk about, but we're not here to talk about that. That's another part of the sort of pipeline discussion. And I use this to have that discussions about the pipeline. What are the leakages in the pipeline? What are some of the opportunities within the pipeline? How do we deal with this pipeline as researchers and as policymakers? But for us, I want to talk about this critical juncture called basic skills. This is really developmental education. And so, as you know, we often think of post-secondary education as this linear pathway, right? Where where the vast majority aspire to transfer. And we know that's true by looking at some of the data that comes out of the California Community College Chancellor's Office, right? A good majority of students who apply to community colleges, when they check off that box about your goals, they say that they want to transfer, right? There's some racial differences, but for the most part, they want to transfer. So they start they sometimes get a certificate, sometimes transfer, sometimes get the AA degree or AS degree and then move on to transfer. That's sort of the linear model. But those of you who work in community colleges, those of you who went to community colleges, how many went to community colleges in the room? I'm talking to the choir here. Know that it's not a linear process. It looks more like this, right? For various reasons, it's not linear. I mean, people stop out, even though the vast majority would want to aspire to transfer. Things happen as you go through this pipeline, right? Life happens, work happens, responsibility happens, all kinds of things happen that we'll talk about. I mean, you can be taking courses at a community college, taking a course and try to enroll in the next course and it's not offered, or you can't get in. And so you have to postpone that trajectory. It's a little easier in the UC to keep going on that trajectory because in terms of course offerings, but the community college with budget cuts, it can be very difficult. What I try to do every beginning of every semester, I try to get onto a campus and just to sort of hang out on the campus and to feel the vibe of a campus. I mean, we're qualitative researchers, Amanda and I, and our team that's doing these case studies are qualitative researchers. And part of it, we want to be on that campus, see what it feels like, right? And if you've ever been on a community college campus, many of you were those students on those campuses, it's an amazing place that first week of the semester. There is so much vibrance and so much activity, anticipation, anxiety. This last fall, I was going to meet a former student of mine who teaches at East Los Angeles College. And there was like packed, there was lines to get into her room. And I thought, well, you know, I'm going to go and just say hi to her and see how she's doing. And just me trying to get into the door ahead of this line was really difficult because they thought I was butting in and trying to get into the course without standing in that line. But you know, what we knew is that the vast majority of young people outside in that hallway were not going to get into that class, right? There was only 40 seats in that class, right? And so maybe 2 were going to get in, but there were at least 30, 35, maybe 40 outside in the hall waiting to get into that political science 1 class that she was teaching, right? And so I like to be in that space, but it's also it's a troubling space to be in because you realize that there's anticipate this aspiration of people wanting to do well, wanting to get into these courses and continue on in their post-secondary career. So we have issues with stopping out, people leaving, going back to work maybe, or because there's no courses, they just can't take the courses. They don't want to lose their financial aid by taking 1 course, etc. They often get into what I use here in quotes, remediation. In other words, they take the assessment, and by way of the assessment, they get placed in a particular course, and we'll talk about specifically in a second. And then they make their way through. And so by the time that someone gets a certificate, or someone gets an AA or AS degree, or someone transfers, I mean, these students have really been through a lot. These are really resilient students. And then they come to a place like UCLA. I gave this talk Tuesday at UCLA with using some UCLA data. When you look at Black and Latino students at UCLA who transfer to UCLA, the graduation rates are almost as high for Latinos. It's a 1% difference with whites. So once they get there, once they get to UCLA, they're successful. If success can be measured by graduation. For African Americans, it's a little lower, but it's still relatively high compared to any other 4-year institution, right? A CSU or a UC institution. So I argue something's happening as they make their way through this process. But also we have responsibilities at the receiving institution to make that, when they come to a place like UCLA or Sac State or UC Davis or any other of our campuses, that we welcome them there, we support them, we get them through that section of the pipeline. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find out more about this nonlinear sort of pathway, in this case, to transfer post-secondary success at the community college. So why a nonlinear pathway? I'm only going to focus on one part of this. I would argue I'm going to use Latino developmental education as a case. And here we're using data that we've collected from the Chancellor's Office, the Community College Chancellor's Office. And we've been looking at cohort data from 2009 to 2012. They said look at it for 3 years. And to see as students where they assess in at. Because you know, one of the first things you do when you apply to a community college, you have to take an assessment test. a math assessment, and an English writing and reading assessment test. I'm only going to focus on math today. But the bottom line is that's what you have to do. You got to take that assessment test. And based on the assessment test, you're placed into a course, a math course. The hope is that you can be placed into a transfer level math course, a math course that will transfer to CSU or UC. But that's not the case. So, before I get there, I'm going to pass this. I'm going to keep moving on. Here's the data. We know that 10% of Latino students in that period that I shared with you, that cohort that we looked at from 2009 2012, that 3-year period, 10% actually initially assess in at a transfer level course. That means 90% don't. 90% of Latino students do not assess in at a transfer level math course. Now, I study pipelines, and I study leakages in pipelines. Believe me, this is one of the biggest leakages in the Latino pipeline. And it's one that we're not talking about. We're not having discussions about. We're not engaging with each other around some of these issues in ways that I'd like to talk to you after. But basically, 90% don't. And of those 90%, 14% will assess in at 4 levels, 4 courses below transfer. That means they have to stay in college for 2 years taking 4 courses just to take the transfer level course. So a 2-year college degree or transfer process is not a reality for these students. Absolutely not. And then, let's say they take the 4th level course and then they move into the 3rd level. What if it's not available? What if they can't get in? What if they don't have priority registration? Then they got to wait another semester to try to get in. Right? So these are some of the challenges that community college students have when they assess in at these levels. About 26% assess in at 3 levels below. That means that 40% assess in at less than 3 or 4 levels below transfer level math. 32% assess in at 2 levels below. So when you add all this up, I think it's close to, well, I'll tell you right now, it's 73% assess in below, less than 1 level below. The reason I say that is because those of you who work in first-year experience programs, FYE programs, or those in Puente programs, the cut line for admission is 1 level below. In other words, they want, if you're going to be in their program, you have to assess in at least 1 level below transfer level math, or English, in their case. Right? Some of the other FYE programs, we're looking at a program at East LA College called Adelante, 1 level below. That means that 73% can't even enter into FYE programs. And some of the data suggests that these FYE programs are pretty successful. They're showing good results, positive results. But students aren't assessing in at that level. And we also know that the lower the course level the student starts, the less chance that she has of finishing. Continue. This is data that if you look at, again, Tom Bailey's shop over at Columbia University, he has study upon study showing this. The further behind you are in this assessment level, you know, where you are in math or English, the less likely you are to finish and transfer. And so only 14% of all these students, these students who assess in below transfer level, only 14% will go on and take a transfer level math course and pass a transfer level math course. Only 14%. Again, this is a major leak in the educational pipeline. That means that, I'm sorry. That means that 86% don't. We lose them. And I argue we have to do something about that. We have to have some discussions about that. We have to have cross-segment discussions about some of these issues, especially around math. I mean, some of the student experiences we found in this area, students say that they feel stuck in the developmental education courses, often spending 2 to 3 years before taking college level or transfer level courses. 2 or 3 years. Some students found the course to be helpful refreshers. Most felt as though they were repeating middle or high school coursework. Right. And students encountered ineffective pedagogy. I mean, I'm not about to criticize my colleagues in community college around pedagogy, but I certainly would like us to have some conversations about math pedagogy. I mean, we know something about math pedagogy in the K-12 sector. We have conversations. I've met with my chair of my department, Megan Frankie, an amazing math educator, right? But I asked Megan, have you had conversations about math education, about pedagogy with our community college partners? She goes, no, we don't have those. We don't have cross-segment conversations. K-12 talk to each other, and well, higher ed, I'm not sure if we talk to. I'm not sure if we talk to each other. I mean, unfortunately, I mean, those of us who teach at the community college, and I taught, as I said, for 10 years. I wasn't trained to teach. I've been at UC for 23 years, UCLA for 23 years. No one ever trained me to teach. I never went to a teacher training program to teach me how to teach college. It doesn't happen. So unfortunately, we're not training, educating our colleagues at the post-secondary level about how to teach, whether it's math or sociology or psychology. But in this particular case, we're talking about math. And I think we have to have some discussion about pedagogy. And I think we can learn from our colleagues in the K-12 sector that are already having these discussions. For instance, there's something, some of you know about Puente, the Puente program, right? And that's been a pretty successful community college program. But one of the goals of Puente, or one of the ways in which they achieve their goals, is that they have what they call a culturally relevant curriculum, coursework. So you take a course and you deal with the Latino literature, or your writing is around Latino issues, right? So there's this focus on a culturally relevant pedagogy and a culturally relevant curriculum, and it's shown to be successful. It's shown to be successful. My question is, do we have a Puente for math? Right? Where I think we can be having the same conversation with math instructors, right, about culturally relevant math. Well, our colleague over at the University of Illinois, Danny Martin, talks about culturally relevant math in the K-12 sector. But you ask Danny, do you talk to community college teachers in Illinois? Nope, unfortunately, right? There's issues around, there's a colleague of ours at the University of Hawaii, has what we call ethnomathematics, right? Are they talking to post-secondary teachers about what is ethnomathematics? How can they be applied to post-secondary education? No. Ethnomathematics is mostly a K-12, mostly a high school sort of curricular area. So I'm arguing that we should have these conversations, maybe think out of the box about how we're going to deal with this issue, since it's such an important issue from my perspective, and I think from the project's perspective. And so some of the experiences, I mean, the lack of understanding about their importance in terms of placement. I mean, often students will be told, okay, you got to take a placement test, and they're not told how important that is, right? They just go and take the exam either online, right? Mostly it's almost all online now. The lack of preparation for the test. Most institutions don't have a prep program for that exam, for that math or English exam. But yet it's such an important, because it places you in a particular course that leads to transfer. And as we said, poor test performance affects a timely goal progression. And so basically, this is what they're telling us. This is what our students are telling us. And specifically, this is what they're telling us about the placement from our data. They said, they never told me if you didn't score high enough, you were not going to be able to take a lot of classes. That's what they're telling us. They're getting bad information, or they're not getting enough information from counselors or from teachers or from institutional staff at these community colleges. They say, I didn't know what to study from. It was a what do you know kind of test. They don't even know what they're taking in many cases. They haven't been told what they're taking and the importance of it. It's disappointing because I already took that class in high school, so I don't want to take it again and then pay for it. There's this issue of finances as well. Some of the voices around developmental education, it could be three to 4 years to transfer from a community college, and that's kind of scary. I feel I haven't progressed. These are just examples. There are many more examples in our study where students are talking about their experience with placement and developmental education. English 28 was like middle school English, and I already did all of that. That's how they're perceiving that lower level course that they were assessed into. And then finally, there was a time in Math 40, my brother's in 6th grade, and we were taking the same class. So here's a community college student basically reflecting on their younger brother taking the same class in 6th grade, 7th grade. But in the end, we argue that, as I said before, that the community colleges are all about hope. And if you've been on a community college, if you've talked to community college students, if you look at the data in terms of their aspirations, their goals, it's all about hope. It really is. And that's something that we have to make sure that hope becomes a reality. And I think we have to intervene at points. And one of those places of intervention, I would argue, and this is what the project is clearly stating, is that developmental math portion, where there has to be some sort of intervention, some sort of discussion that we can have within the segment, within community colleges, but I would argue across segments. I think we have to have that conversation as well. And so in the end, as Amanda mentioned, what we're trying to answer in this project is, what role do educational institutions, like community colleges, or like the University of California, or like CSUs, what role do educational institutions and their leaders, like us, people in this room, in other rooms, play in maximizing opportunities and minimizing obstacles for students to the community college pipeline? That's the question we want to answer. And hopefully, through these studies that Amanda shared with you and some of the data I just shared with you right now, hopefully we'll become to have not answers, but conversations that might lead to some answers. But we have to have those conversations. And evidence-based, data-based conversations, I think, is one place to start. So, thank you. And by the way, if you want to go to our website, we have a number of policy briefs and policy reports that you can download as PDFs. Here's the website here. And so we have a number of different resources for you. There'll be a lot more in the next couple of weeks because we're winding down the project. And we're posting everything for people to take a look at and give us some feedback on. So thank you.
So questions for Daniel and Amanda? David?
Refresh me the definitions of 1 level, 2 levels, and 3 levels below transfer.
Well, what it is, when a student comes in and takes the assessment test, and I think it either be Accuplacer or Compass, or so they have other types of tests, but those are the 2 main tests. The test actually places you in a particular course at that particular college. And that's something that, and so it'll place you at, it says that you have to take, let's say, a course that's 3 courses below transfer level course.
When you say below, I don't know the definition operationally of below.
Well,
is it Algebra 1? Is it Geometry?
you know, I think it starts with arithmetic, and it makes its way up to, I think, Algebra 1, I think it is the final one. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, that's what they do. But here's another thing that we don't talk about, right? If you, and I'm not sure how to say this without getting people in trouble, but often at different community colleges, if you place at a certain level at a particular college, sometimes a counselor or a teacher will tell you, you know what, go and take the test at another college. They have a different cut score. And so it might instead of getting you level 3, you'll get in level 2. So they basically send people over to another campus to take the course, to take the test, the assessment. So even between colleges, there's not consistency. And that's also a challenge, and one I think we have to deal with.
Can you speak to whether it's still the case that also added to the challenges that you pointed out about developmental ed, that some of what the being said is also about the non-credit status of those courses?
Yeah.
In other words, the units are also not accumulating in a meaningful way. Is that still the case?
Absolutely. You don't get credit. Although you don't get credit for it, but if you're on financial aid, it takes away from your financial aid. You're taking X number of units. So yes, that's a problem. So students, that's why some of those students are saying, you know, I'm using my financial aid money, For non-credit courses, I'm basically stuck. And you only have so much money in financial aid. And so often they'll use all their money in the first 2 years or so. And then they come to a place like, or maybe in the first 3 years, they come to a place like Cal State Sacramento or UCLA, and their financial aid is wiped out because they've been taking these courses that unfortunately don't lead to, well, it could be problematic.
It's almost like when the courses are, well, you've got to go all the way back and do the whole course, instead of looking at what their problems were on the test and saying, these are the things we're seeing problems. Was it just an arithmetic error?
Yeah.
Calculator does that.
Yeah.
Is it a concept error? Can you it's like they almost need a tutoring thing to kind of get, I mean, you can have terrible handwriting and somebody can't read your writing sometimes on a written test, but you can still get the concept. You may occasionally kind of make, I had a course in junior high in junior college I went back after, and he gave me partial credit because he says, you didn't add right, but you got formula right. So, that was the key thing.
Yeah.
And things like that, instead of just saying, oh, here's where you cut, where was the problem?
Exactly.
And having targeting classes for helping kids with the problem that caused them to get them.
Well, and I think part of the issue too is that, I mean, obviously we didn't discuss it in this presentation, but we need to take a real look at how they're being prepared in high schools. Why are we getting to this point that students don't have this preparation? But in some high schools that are doing some interesting work around this, they're actually helping to prepare students for these tests. Like they're sending a lot of students to community college. One of the high schools in our study.
The other problem is that you're only required to take math so far.
Right.
And for English, you have to take it for your own.
Before you, yeah.
It's maybe we need to require in high school, the graduation requirements ought to require math. If you're going to go all the way through, even if it's just doing tangential, doing this, if you're not using it, if you take a course, you could pass it. You pass the course in high school, but then if it's 2 or 3 years before you have to take this placement test, if you're not using it every day, you're going to not get it.
Yeah. I actually scare myself wondering if I took this test, how I would do it. I really do. Yes. Uh-huh.
In the context of policy, I mean, some of these findings, the data, the actual numbers are even worse than we thought of. But in policy terms, this is not necessarily new information. There have been some responses. The SB 1440, which was a community college process to improve transfer. Some work on articulation with K-12 over content, of course, rigor. But what do you think? And there used to be, up until a year and a half ago, a Postsecondary Education Commission, which part of whose role was to facilitate these cross-segment discussions and to accumulate data that you could eventually, we hope, follow all the way from pre-K to workforce. In that database is not likely to be developed in my lifetime, but I'm old, so that's okay. And there is no institution at the moment who even remotely has that role to foster those kinds of conversations. So what kind of vehicle would you, if you call for cross-segmental conversation, more conversation about teaching, about pedagogy at the college level, more success for kids coming through the K-12 pipeline so that they don't need remedial when they get to post-secondary. What mechanisms do you see as having an impact on that discussion right now when we're at a time that education finally has a little bit of money to work on some of these problems?
Well, I don't know if you want to answer. I can begin to sort of, I think there's a model that might work, and I'm not sure if at least, well, I'll give it to you, tell me what you think. At UCLA, we have this thing within the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies called CenterX. And CenterX is a sort of an amazing sort of way in which we bring people together around different topical areas, social studies, geography, writing, etc. But it's a place where we bring people together from across the state and have conversations. We have engaged conversations. We come up with some answers, some of the problems that we have within the K through 12. It's really a K through 12 center. Either expand CenterX into that next segment, which is community college, which I think I would like to see them do. I don't know if my colleagues would want me to even say that. I mean, the director is a guy named my colleague Tyrone Howard. If he heard me saying this right now, he'd probably be saying, "What are you talking about? Expanding CenterX, but with support. But I think that space would allow us to have these conversations between the different segments, between community college and the K through 12 sector. A space like that where we have inquiry, we can ask questions, we can engage in conversation, we can engage in research that would help us deal with some of these issues. See, for me, there's two issues that I think that I guess we can talk about, maybe not here, but at some point. I think there's an assessment issue here. I think there's a question around the assessment test, the compass or the AccuPlacer test. I think we can have that conversation about what is it really measuring, and should it be measuring some of the things that you talked about, or how can we deal with? Is it just that this person has a problem with this particular part of a mathematics, a part of mathematics? And we can talk about that, and maybe we can talk about it within that context. But I also think it's a pedagogical issue, the way in which we teach mathematics. And I think that's a little more difficult. I brought this up at Tom Bailey's meeting about 2 or 3 weeks ago in New York, and someone said that I just touched the third rail, right? Because you don't want to talk about math pedagogy. They don't want to talk about pedagogy, period, at least in that context. But certainly not math pedagogy, because they argue that there's some struggle within a lot of fields, but in that particular field, there's a struggle between pure mathematics and applied mathematics, right? So, and you're sort of touching an area that might cause some concern amongst your colleagues.
But like 90% of the people need the applied math, or 95% really, not especially 90% need that applied math. Carpentry, if you have to do things like that, or just calculating your budgets.
Exactly. And see, that's what we're seeing. You remember we told you one of our sites was a career and technical education community college in Southern California. That's exactly how they're teaching developmental math as applied math, right? Because it's relevant to the work that they're doing within a welding program or within a fashion design program. But the same is not true in the quote transfer program. It's a different kind of curriculum, developmental math curriculum in those programs, and that's maybe we can learn from our welding faculty, our fashion design faculty about learning the basics of mathematics in an applied fashion.
Something that's going to be useful for everybody.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the key things that Damien sort of alluded to is, the quality of the teaching really varies. It obviously varies a great deal in K-12, and that's one of the reasons we see some of the outcomes we do. Particularly across different types of communities. But in community colleges, one of the additional challenges is the majority of people teaching in community college are not full-time faculty. So the number of full-time faculty has really dwindled over the years, and it's a minority of the faculty. And these courses, the basic skills courses that are so critical for students, just like in K-12 settings where low-status courses are taught by new teachers, these are also taught by adjunct instructors who are managing, probably teaching at multiple universities without any professional development provided, with little guidance provided. And so, these critical courses for students are the ones that we probably, just like in K-12, when we see under-resourced settings, that's where we need our best teachers, we oftentimes don't find them there. And so this is an additional issue, and sometimes there aren't people who are even, qualified to be teaching this, wide array of students. And so it's an additional problem that I think, the community colleges are definitely concerned about it. My colleagues who are teaching in community college are very concerned about both math and English placement testing and how it leads students to these kinds of outcomes. But they kind of feel like the system is broken and they're not really sure what to do. And there are different viewpoints. There are some faculty that think, by golly, we should be sorting students out. These ones that are scoring below should never be getting on to transfer level coursework, and so in fact the system is working well. The same way that people advocate for tracking in high schools at times without really seeing how this narrows our pipeline so much. So it's a really complex issue, both around the assessment, but also around, what are the conditions for teaching in community colleges. I mean, years ago we offered a community college teaching credential. No one offers that anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. And there's even very little research on how people come to be good community college faculty. We've seen some amazing teaching in our courses. We've also seen some that is, not so amazing. But we've seen some phenomenal people. But the same is true in K-12, right? And so, but we've seen some phenomenal people doing really transformative work with students in some of the settings that we've observed. And students really notice that. I mean, across the whole study, not just in developmental ed, they speak really powerfully about the teaching experience that they've had. People who really transformed their lives, connecting with a faculty member who opened up, their mind to new ideas and really got them interested in learning, and others who completely closed the door, So it's a huge range.
Dan?
Yeah, let me just give you a place where you may be able to probably find some answers. I work in alternative ed and K-12 education. And we have a number of things to offer you. One is in Diploma Plus continuation education in schools where those are not as successful. There's a lot of adaptive testing because students who have gaps in their knowledge, but they also have knowledge between the gaps. And so they can identify what's known and then fill in the gaps rather than have full repetition from other courses. So that allows for much more rapid progress. We also have people who are skilled in teaching multiple modalities, who can use visual and aesthetic approaches to make that clearer, because we recognize a lot of the students who are taught have been taught by people talking at them, and that's just not necessarily their neurological strength. There's flexibility. We have people, because the students have struggled, are really experts in looking at social and emotional development and resiliency, and it's wrapped around and put into the context of cultural competency. So the jury knows how to find that. It may not be into another meeting, but we really have some experts within the alternative schools in the K-12 education where we have those students who are dropping away, and we get them up and back up to success. So,
and that's usually in the secondary sector, right? That's usually in the secondary sector that you're talking about.
Also, I lead community-based schools and opportunity ed for the state, which are both elementary as well as Diploma Plus, which is high school.
See, this is the kind of conversation I think that would be helpful. If we brought folks like yourself and what the area that you represent with community college folks, with other K-12 folks, and have this engaged conversation about what works, what can work. Absolutely.
So I'd love to meet you.
Absolutely.
But Jerry knows how to.
Okay, good.
Carol.
Hi, I had understood that CSU had a program that was relatively successful, where they actually hooked up with K-12 and figured out how to assess kids and give them a preview of where they would end up as far as remedial courses went. And they've been relatively successful in getting kids to focus on their education maybe before they left K-12. I'm surprised I haven't heard anything from you guys about that program.
Well, we're not.
MDTP? Are you talking about MDTP?
EAP.
Yeah, EAP. Oh, okay. Yeah, there are a lot of, in fact, some of the students in the San Diego study have been involved in different types of college preparatory programs. Not so much, and I don't think we've investigated around the assessment issue per se, but in terms of, AVID, EAP, others that are kind of helping students get geared up for college. But I don't know.
Well, EAP is an assessment that they do.
But there's also a program in addition, right?
Well, I thought
I'm not familiar with this.
That basically what they did was, it was a part of the K-12, well, it's kind of an optional part of the K-12 assessment system, and they use it to assess where a kid would land in terms of remediation in CSU. And it gives the kid an early indication.
Yeah, we didn't come across that, but I'll definitely investigate it.
Definitely should look at it.
It is part of the STAR test, 15 questions.
Yes.
Okay, right.
15 questions, math variant.
Got it.
Students take it during their 11th year.
But
So it's part of the
this
KC?
issue that you guys.
It's not part of the KC though?
No.
So it's part of the regular STAR test first?
Yeah.
Okay.
A little bit about the EAP, because I work at the STAR office. EAP is a part of the math assessment.
Got it.
But that's only assessed for your college ready or not ready. So for math, you only students reach algebra 2 or some of your high school math, they have the additional EAP portion. So you're talking about your specific group, they will never reach the EAP level to take the STAR test to get the EAP. And also, EAP is a great effort of the K-12, our department, collaboration with the college, and now we extend to some of the community colleges, but not all of them. However, you mentioned how many community colleges we have. Each community college, they have their own assessment, and their assessment is widely different from one another. So that's another policy issue we should think about.
Yeah. Thank you, though. We'll look into it didn't come up in our study at all, but we'll look into further.
It's a CSU initiative.
Yes.
And working with K-12, and I don't get why community colleges can't do the same thing. But I think the fact that they're so decentralized and have different assessment systems, for example.
There actually, I did come across an example of that, that sort of communication, and that's why I'm familiar with a little bit with what you're talking about. That was at Chaffey College. They have this sort of, they work with the different K through the different high schools that serve the Chaffey College up in Rancho Cucamonga. So it came up there. Right, but I think Chaffey is one of those exemplary programs where they're actually doing something both about assessment, they're doing something about pedagogy, they're doing something about curriculum, and so I think that's where I came in contact with what you're talking about. But it was I think they borrowed the CSU model and they applied it to the schools that serve Chaffey Community College.
Just getting back to you on that. Center X is an awesome organization, and when there was the federally funded partnership teacher professional development program, the Center X has managed a number of those projects on the UCLA campus. There's some awesome stuff going on now in K-12 math pedagogy, and there's the schools of education are now focusing on teaching specifics of math and science pedagogy. So there's those resources out there. One other potential, the notion is regional is more doable for a lot of people than statewide. Yeah. There are, within the workforce community, there are a lot of regional education partnerships or regional education to employment partnerships, and some of that is managed through the Workforce Investment Board. So it seems to me that those regional mechanisms are a very good place to start, and then you have sub-conversations around specific topics. And you come up with plans of action, because you can talk forever and not necessarily come up with plans of action. But the bottom line is that there's not some state leadership and some additional resources to give people the capacity to actually collaborate and develop strategies. That costs money. That's time. That's resource. That's all kinds of resources beyond time. And I think that's a good deal of why it doesn't happen. That there's neither the strong policy support of the state for collaborative work, nor are the resources and the accountability and expectations built in for it. So this may be very good ammunition for people who think that's something the state policy ought to pay attention to. But without it, I'm not sure you're going to have it. You'll have spotty success around the state.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
Joe.
Could you elaborate just a bit more? I heard you say a couple of things about some of the successful high school practices that you confirmed that seem to lead to more success for many of these students when they reach community college. And then similarly, are you looking at the community colleges themselves from the standpoint of what else are they doing other than putting these students into remedial developmental courses? In other words, is that the primary means by which many of the community colleges are supporting student success? Or are there other things they could do, perhaps learning from K-12 experience in this area?
I'll try to start on the first and answer part of the second, and have Danny chime in. I think in that, one of the practices we have seen is one of our high schools in the high school study that's led by Susan Yanazawa and Makiba Jones at UCSD. They found was having students take the placement test while they were in high school, so giving some students preparation for it, so that when they were leaving high school, they had taken the test. They did some practice for it, because again, the majority of people don't even know it exists. They walk in to enroll in classes, they think this is a fine time to go ahead and take the test. They don't know that it might be online, there may be some way to prepare for it, and so on. So, that's one practice. And they also provide other kinds of college support in terms of getting prepared for community college, like filling out the FAFSA, the federal application for students. No, sometimes it's just individual teachers. And I think when one of the reports we're about to post up on the web, I just saw the proof today, is looking at the kinds of information students are getting about college and high school, and it is dismal. If students who are in special programs are getting that kind of information, how to apply to college, prepare for community college, four-year college, and so on, apply for financial aid. In other cases, it's really haphazard, and part of it is because, as you probably know, in K-12, we've had a huge decline in the number of counselor positions we're funding. And so students have very little opportunity. I think the state ratio is almost 1,000 to 1 for counselors. Similar kinds of percentages. It's also dismal in the community college. When students get there, they have very little access to people. So unless they're in a special program, which I'll talk about in a minute, those resources are not there. So a lot of it is happening frontline with teachers. Teachers in the K-12, teachers in the community college are providing a lot of the mentoring and advice. Coaches, other kinds of mentors. They're doing a lot of that advising of, let me sit you down and help you fill out this financial aid application. We have a brief that's up on the web on financial aid application issues that students have. It's a huge problem that students don't understand how to fill it out, can't get assistance with it, run into all kinds of issues with getting the funding that they need, and of course this causes them to stop out. So that's a big other area we could have focused on today. But there are some programs that are making a difference. In high schools, I mean, you know about some of the college support programs that exist. We had some students who choiced into particular high schools. Those ones tend to be doing better of the ones we're studying. These are students who made an active choice to get into a high school program that was offering something special or different, and those seem to be offering them a little bit more high quality preparation, or bus to another school across town in whatever city they were living in, and got better preparation there. We still had some of those students who completed the A-G curriculum who still, interestingly enough, placed below transfer level in their coursework, which is interesting to me. But at the community college level, we have seen some very promising practices. When students are hooked up with a special program, all kinds of special supports come along with that. And it can be some that are targeted for low-income students like EOPS, so that they're getting book vouchers, they're required to come to orientations, they're required to go to counseling sessions, they're required to develop an education plan. Those things all help a lot. But we've also got, within our sample, a couple of different programs that are kind of learning communities. Danny referred to one, first year, freshman year experience program. We have another learning community in a different college. And in those cases, the students are getting priority registration. That helps a huge amount. They get this advising on an ongoing basis. They have somebody who's watching over their coursework. They're taking things as a cohort in some cases. All those things make a difference. And those same kinds of things make a difference in the high school as well. But those are some of the examples we've seen, in addition to these CTE examples that have been quite promising as well. You want to add anything?
No, I was going to mention the FYE, the first year experience programs. I think those are really absolutely promising. And for various populations. I mean, in the case of, as I mentioned, at East Los Angeles College, the Adelante program was for immigrant students. And so it's really focused on first year experience for immigrants, and it's been really successful. And then the program at one of our campuses in the South Bay of Southern California, it's a very, very, it's a good program. It shows some really good results in terms of persistence over time. But I'm looking to find, and I guess the Chafee program was that program that connected the community college with the local high schools, the service schools. I think that's also very promising. I think but we have to have these conversations. I think it's important that Chafee has the conversation, but I think it's got to be scaled out a little bit more, because as we said, there's 112 campuses. It's a huge system, and so it's quite an effort.
We had very few students in honors programs, but most community colleges have those as well. The downside is that there's a criteria, and most of them have a criteria for admission. So you need to have a 3.25 in whatever prior college coursework you had or in high school. And so that's a limitation for some of the students who, again, we're talking about students who are underprepared. They're from low-income families. They were often attending under-resourced high schools. And so they're underprepared because of what we know happens or may not happen in some of the schools serving those students. And so that is a bit of an issue. There are some colleges, though, that are experimenting, including one in San Diego, that are with open access to honors courses. So students come in and they say, I want to try the honors program. They say, great, we'll be glad to give you the support. And those kinds of interventions are quite promising, because otherwise, even when students look at the list of potential support programs, they say, I don't qualify for this one, I'm not, my parents didn't file a tax return last year. Or I don't have this GPA, I'm just below that, or I'm don't fall into this particular group. And so, college personnel will tell us that a lot of their programs even actually go unused because they can't actually get the information out to students to try to help them connect.
Dave.
Questions. Would I assume correctly that you will be having some recommendations that are based on the research you've done?
Yeah.
And second question is, where will those recommendations go?
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, it'll, aside from in report form, we're at the stage of just developing our final report right now, which will be out we'll send it to the print in June. So that's where we're kind of pulling things together across the multiple parts. Hopefully people like, you all, but the Gates Foundation is helping us connect with different organizations, and then a pretty wide media spread, as you might imagine. I don't know exactly how that'll play out.
Do you think you're meeting with the Senate Ed Committee staff or other people like that to show them what the recommendations are and what might be done?
That would be great. I mean, if we can get access. So, we have to start working on that dissemination plan as you're kind of catching us in the midst of wrapping up. But absolutely, those are super important ideas. Yeah.
You had a second question. Was that
You
okay?
answered it, you said
Okay.
you will have recommendations.
Okay.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
So I'm curious if people in the room saw this. It was quite a stunning study that came out last week, I believe. I'm not sure if it was regarding California community colleges, maybe not a study, but it was a study of students who were admitted into transfer level courses at the community college in their state based on their grades in high school rather than an entrance exam. And that the success rate of those students was stunningly high.
Yeah. I believe that came out of Tom Bailey's shop at CCRD. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if that has, or it obviously does, what sort of impact it has on how we go forward?
Yeah, I mean, that has to be, I mean, we have to use, I mean, some Tom's work and some of the work out of the Community College Research Center at Columbia as part of our recommendations as well. We're not looking at that. I mean, we didn't look at we didn't study that particular part. He did in his study, in his work. But that obviously one of the recommendations based on some work that our other colleges are doing in other states. Absolutely, as another indicator, another predictor, if you will.
So we have time for one more question.
Based on your research, you said it's been going on for about 5 years now. Did you come across any non-cognitive factors that point to success based on the students who have graduated or dealt with the obstacles?
You know, there's a whole literature on non-cognitive predictors of success. I mean, I think of William Sedlacek's work, right?
Right, but based on what you
I mean, again, if you're asking us about the national data sets, I'm not sure what we can say about non-cognitive factors.
I mean, I think what we can say a little bit, and it's interesting. I mean, I think because although we think it's important to look at student interaction at the local level and how they interface with colleges, and this is what we've been reporting today, we shy away from sort of looking at individual characteristics and how they might predict certain kinds of student success, aside from achievement patterns, which we're looking at in the quantitative. But we have been playing with this idea, and it's in our draft final report, but we haven't fleshed it out enough to share with you yet, about, you know, sort of different types of help-seeking behaviors that students might develop, you know, things that they dispositions that the students themselves have that might allow them to take more or less advantage of different kinds of programs. I don't know that we've got great data on that, and it's tricky. I mean, some are definitely more resilient than others, but there's this whole set of factors, and once you kind of dig beneath the surface, you'll see a whole set of life circumstances that kind of led them to that, or sets of supports that they have around them. So I think when I think about student resilience and some of the ways in which they orient towards school, it's usually not just this one person and something amazing inside them. I mean, we try to pretend that, and honestly, Danny and I have talked about this before. When we teach students at our universities, oftentimes they are among the higher achieving students in our state, either coming through transfer or through the freshman route, and they oftentimes think that they got there purely on their own successes, that they are wonderful, amazing people, and they're incredible, and my students are fantastic. But it oftentimes takes some talking when you kind of have to say, listen, you got here due to a whole host of set of support factors. You might have attended a high school that offered you something, you know, particularly. You might have had a teacher who interviewed. You might have had parents who had these, you know. So when we look at this, we really look at this as sort of as a unit of support. And so we spend a lot of our time in this study focusing on what are the things around a student that might, or peers, that might help them get there. That, yes, the student and their own internal factors are super important, but the kinds of supports that we can set up, because we're focused very much on the institutional pieces, that can promote more students seeking help when they need it, you know, getting advice when they need it, that it's less about the individual person and them having to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and carry this all on their shoulders, but more an institutional responsibility to making that happen. Is that right?
But you know, one thing we did find, it was part of the national study. I'm not sure, I think it was Cynthia's research, in terms of mentoring. And it wasn't what we had expected. We had expected the mentor would be a teacher or a counselor. It turns out that the heavy predictor, or the most positive predictor of success, mentoring success, was a coach. Was their high school coach, and there was one other person within that really was really a better predictor than the ones we'd anticipated, or the ones that they had anticipated when they did the study. And so that we had thought that it would be a teacher that would be the mentor that had an impact on them, or a counselor. I think it was a coach, and I think it was a parent. Those were the two strong mentoring predictors. Unexpected, at least she thought it was unexpected. I'm talking. She is Cynthia Feliciano at UC Irvine, a sociology professor who did this particular part of the research. So that's a non-cognitive sort of predictor that we unexpectedly found, or they unexpectedly found.
And when you go on our website, you'll see reports written by many other people in addition to ourselves, but most of the reports up there are written by people who led these different outcome teams that I described to you. And so there's I think we've got about 25 reports up or in development, but the majority are there already. So if you log onto the website, you can see all different reports on all these different types of topics and see if something, hits on the kind of thing you're interested in.
I just want to follow up on this last couple of comments. And I guess one of the pictures that emerges in the data is the student still a very passive client without a sense of agency. And your comments just now about, the need to really look at, even given the native traits of a person and so forth, we're leaving those aside and looking at institutional support and environmental factors that promote success in students. It seems that somewhere in your methodology with all the case studies, there might be some room for actually that aspect, because it would actually help have institutional supports that promote.
And that's exactly what we're doing. We're not trying to leave their attributes aside by any means, but we're trying to say, if we simply explain all of these outcomes that we get on students' attributes, we're going to miss a big part of the picture. Because in fact, when we look at students, we can see very different trajectories. We can follow two students who have very similar life circumstances, both single mothers raising a couple of children who were still teenagers, for example, and we have many of those in our sample. They may have very different experiences in college based on who they connect with, what kinds of high school experiences they had. We ask them a lot about their background, their preparation. We have a student we might be following who came out of special education we have a student in our sample, I know we cited in the final report, he said, I never learned my times tables. This is obviously going to be a big limitation for transfer, right? Versus someone who's just, charging ahead and has already transferred in the course of our study. And so we do have, they have huge differences in their preparation, even though on the face of it, they might look like they're part of a similar population, low-income single mothers with two children who are teenagers. The mothers themselves are teenagers, for example. So it's not as if we're ignoring those, and the agency is really important. And that's why I was starting to get at this issue of we're starting to find that students are at different stages of their development. And so there are times in which, and it's the same, I liken it to reading a novel. I can read a novel one day, and it speaks to me in one way, and it may just not really connect with me. I can pick it up again 2 years later, being in a different point in my life, and I pick it up, and all of a sudden it's extremely relevant to me. And the students orient with information very much in that same way, we find. So sometimes I can talk to one of my kids and give them a whole bunch of information about how they should be working in school. But it's not relevant to them until they've all of a sudden got a grade that they're not pleased with. And then all of a sudden they really need to hear what I might be able to do to help them, right? And so it's all of that. It's about kind of how do we customize our services to students so that we get them at a developmental level or keep up with them on a regular basis so that when we're giving them information that's really useful to them, it's at a point when they actually need it and can use it. Because students will be honest and say, I wasn't willing to hear it right then. I know my counselor told me that, but I was in a different place. I couldn't. I mean, a lot of the students we're talking with are barely struggling to make ends meet. I can't even focus on that. I can't even figure out how to transport myself to school or to provide childcare for my children or to do this job, the 3 that I'm working to make a living wage. I mean, that's a whole other piece of the set of conditions around low-income students that we didn't talk about. But there are a lot of other challenges that people are negotiating while they're trying to manage their education. And that's part of the personal circumstance that, they're working with. Yeah?
But another non-cognitive factor that crosses the national data set, the survey, the California State Survey, and the case studies are aspirations.
Yeah.
These students really aspired to go to college and to be successful in college, and so that I think that's a strength that we have to build on, and I think it's a strength that we see in probably all 112 community colleges in the state of California. It's that aspiration that they have for each other or they have for themselves. And then if you look at that's consistent across other data sets as well. If you look at other national data sets and local data sets.
And the challenge for us is to think about, given the students that we know that have persevered through a set of rather challenging circumstances, given the budget climate and so on, and not being able to get coursework or starting at 4 levels, below transfer level coursework and still managing through. How do we help convince people that this is a population to really pay attention to, and these are the folks you want in your universities because they've been able to manage and persevere through a lot of challenges that look quite different from the students we've actually done a fantastic job of preparing and getting ready for college right out of high school. That's a very different, they've developed a set of life skills and problem-solving skills and cognitive skills that are really important that we need to help people understand and help build on. And yet, in other conversations we have about the same population, people will say, really the goal is just to get them a credential that gives them some value in the labor market. And the focus is not on transfer. And we believe we want them to have a credential with value in the labor market. But you know, some of the credentials that are out there in our state right now are not giving people a living wage. You know, and so they might go and be in a certificate program. There are no jobs after for some certificate programs. And so we're almost selling the students a bill of goods. And a lot of students will tell us this. I thought if I signed up for this, I'd get a job, and I haven't been able to get one. And some of them are going to proprietary colleges where the same situation occurs and taking out, you know, large amounts of loans. And so it's a very complex picture in a state like ours where the economic opportunities aren't the same as they are in some other places right now. And so we want to really kind of raise the bar in terms of, we want all these students to have those opportunities to pursue whatever their dreams might be, rather than say, okay, it's enough. You know what, it's getting them slightly out of poverty, we're good with that, time to move on. But really to say, gosh, imagine if we can develop the talents of all of these people, what are the possibilities, you know?
So I think we're out of time. On behalf of PACE, again, thank you very much for being here today, and let's give Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you.